Ingles.fm Real English Conversations Series 2 Podcast 6 Transport and Travel Medios de Transporte y Viajes. Este podcast contiene una conversación real y sin guión entre dos hablantes nativos de inglés, Mark y Tom. Oirás primero la conversación y a continuación una clase de inglés con explicaciones en español. Cada podcast viene con un workbook detallado que puedes descargar desde nuestra página web ingles.fm. Incluye una transcripción completa de la conversación, listas de vocabulario, notas culturales y la clase. Recuerda que los miembros de nuestra lista de distribución reciben gratis transcripciones extra de nuestros podcasts, además de muchas otras cosas gratis. Así que no olvides apuntarte al consultar la página. ¡Buena suerte!
Hi, my name's Tom, and I'm here with Mark again. Hello, Mark.
Hello, Tom.
We're recording today from Mark's flat because it's been raining a lot outside in Barcelona, and we're in a flat very near to Sants station. So, today we're going to talk all about transport and travel. There's a slight difference. Transport is used to talk about a system of vehicles such as buses, trains and aircraft for getting from one place to another. Whereas travel, very simply, is the act of travelling, or the movement of people between relatively distant geographical locations for any purpose and any duration, with or without any means of transport.
We've travelled quite a lot, and we've used quite a varied means of transportation to do so in our time.
So, can you now give us, Mark, a brief history of transport with the human race?
Well, using the definitions that Tom's just provided, transport actually began with human migration on foot in prehistory. Normally this was because they were following food sources and migrating animals. But the first proper transportation, using any form of vehicle as we know it, would be with the domestication of the horse. Now, I read that this was first achieved about 6,000 years ago in the Ukraine. And after that, chariots were invented around 4,000 years ago, which a type of chariot would also be used in agriculture, and also, as we know chariot to be, helped in the art of warfare.
Can I interject? Something was probably invented before the chariot was invented.
Something that makes a chariot a chariot.
Exactly.
The wheel.
Perfect. And when was that invented?
That was invented around 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. So just after horses were domesticated, they invented the wheel. And again, this was useful for warfare, but also importantly to transport people to new areas, so to expand population centres and regions.
Okay, and what about water transport? Because this has been very popular all along, hasn't it? And the first boats, I think they believe, were hollowed out tree trunk canoes, and really water transport was the only efficient way to transport goods or anything over large distances before the Industrial Revolution, wasn't it, which was in the 18th, 19th centuries.
Yeah.
And what came next? Train travel. And what was invented to facilitate train travel?
The steam engine was something that revolutionized transport, but particularly rail, in the very early 1800s in Britain.
Yeah. And then following that, the combustion engine was invented and saw widespread adoption towards the end of the 19th century, which was the first mechanized private transport. And then the first aeroplane was invented in about 1903, and the commercialization of the jet engine in the 1960s made air travel accessible to the masses. So many people started travelling by air then. And also space flights. This is a strange one because it was developed during the 50s and the 60s and the 70s mainly by the US and by Russia. And there was a huge growth in that at the time, but then it sort of has been on hold. But we'll come back to spaceflight later on. So statistically, what do you think is the most popular mode of transport in the world?
I'd say probably the bicycle, given the popularity of it in China, for example.
And you'll be totally correct. There are 3 bikes in the world for every 1 car. And can you guess how many cars there are in the world?
Oof. No idea.
600 million approximately.
That's a lot.
And talking about Asia, some of the most popular modes of transport there are very different to Europe, for example. It's generally the bicycle and the moped, as you pointed out in China, the bicycle. And in India, how do people travel?
Predominantly by train.
Yeah, and we found an interesting statistic that said 6 billion people travel annually in India. That's 6 billion journeys by people in India, which is the equivalent to the whole world's population making 1 journey in India every year by train. So a very popular railway system, installed by the British, not maintained and now falling apart.
Well, yeah, very old system, no maintenance, needs some investment.
Exactly. Anyway, moving on to the UK, Spain and Latin America. Most popular modes of transport in Spain are car and motorbike. And in Latin America, bus. Almost everywhere, except in Argentina and Mexico, the train is quite popular and they have quite highly developed railway systems there.
Didn't the British invent or build the Argentinian railway system as well?
Yes, I believe to carry beef to Buenos Aires so that we could eat nice steaks in London.
That's a very functional invention.
Exactly. And in Mexico, another interesting statistic, has the 3rd most airports in the world. There's 1,819 airports in Mexico.
My God, I know it's a big country, but that's surprising.
Yeah, it's a huge amount, and that's second after USA and Brazil. So in the UK, how do we mainly travel? What's the most popular modes of transport?
Cars and, I guess, trains and buses.
Yeah. And we've got some comparison data here between the UK and Spain. In Spain, the slightly higher car ownership, 483 cars for every 1,000 inhabitants, whereas in the UK it's 475. But what's interesting is the buses and coaches. In Spain there's 62,000, whereas in the UK 114,000. So we've nearly got double the buses and coaches in the UK.
It's a significantly smaller country, so you'd imagine for economic reasons travelling between Spanish cities by bus, large distances, quite economical, whereas in the UK I think it's I travelled a lot by bus when I was a student because it was very cheap between English cities, but I'm surprised we have that number.
Yeah, I think in Spain they perhaps travel shorter distances and they tend to use motorbikes and cars, but anyway, we'll talk more about that in a second. Because the number of motorbikes and scooters in Spain is very high. There's 4.9 million, and in the UK it's 1.3 million. So why do you think that is?
Well, I think there's a combination of reasons, but from talking to friends here, I'm not sure about the age now, but in the past it was possible to ride a low-powered moped at the age of 14. Whereas in the UK the age is much higher, so people become accustomed to riding on motorbikes, mopeds at a much younger age and probably stay with that mode of transport. And also the weather. It's very nice and sunny in Spain, as most people will know, so riding a moped around in a city is quite pleasant, and you're out in the sun. It's very convenient for nipping in and out of traffic, so you get to your destination much quicker. But in the UK it rains a lot, and it's not very nice to be sitting on a motorbike in the pouring rain and the cold, so maybe less people are interested in travelling by motorbike in the bad weather.
Yeah, I think it probably rains 300 days a year in London. I think I may have read that somewhere, and in Barcelona it's 50 or 55 or something like that. So obviously it's a pretty horrific way to travel to and from work if you arrive at work completely soaked to the skin.
Freezing cold.
And freezing cold, and it's just too cold in the winter to drive around on a motorbike. Anyway, the UK has 804 commercial aircraft against Spain's 343, and we have a huge amount of trains, 10,600 compared to Spain's 1,900.
That's a large difference.
Yeah, and that really surprised me, that statistic, because I thought in Spain, they've got an amazingly developed railway system. Fantastic. I love the Ave train, for example. Very, very efficient trains, and yet a fraction, 10 to 20%, of the trains in the UK.
Maybe because in big cities, especially in London, many people use local trains to get in from the residential areas, to get into the centre of London, to then connect with other forms of public transport to get to work.
Okay.
Whereas in cities like Barcelona, and I'm not sure, I guess Madrid also, big cities in Spain, many more people actually live in the centre and work in the centre. So trains are normally used for people coming from outlying towns, but they don't have the same population demography in terms of working to living places.
Okay. And where do you think the safest roads are in Europe?
I'd have to say England, but apart from the security cameras and the fines and everything that's stopping drivers doing what they want to do, I don't know why else it would be that.
Yeah, there were the lowest road fatalities in Europe per 10 billion passenger kilometres. That's how they measure it.
It's an amazing statistic.
Yeah. And in Spain, there are more than double the accidents than in England. And also, finally, before we move on to a comparison between Barcelona and London, just worth mentioning that because England's an island, well, because the United Kingdom's an island, there's a lot more waterways and canals for transporting things, and the merchant navy is very important in the UK as well.
Yeah, before the invention of steam power, all coal and large, heavy bulk products were transported through the UK, through England, by means of horse-drawn canal boats. So with the steam, that revolutionised that, but the canalways have remained in place.
So, Barcelona compared to London. Car ownership's a luxury here, isn't it? And the taxes, I think, in Barcelona are the highest in Spain for owning a car. They're 20% more than Madrid. And parking is an absolute nightmare. Everyone has to pay for parking under their buildings, and it's like 120 euros a month or 150 euros a month.
It's very expensive.
To park your car before the tax. And because of this, they've had quite a lot of success with an initiative called Bicing, or Beasing, I don't know how it's pronounced, which is a community bicycle program. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, well, through the local council, you can apply for a little electric card, and it's got all of your personal data on this card, and you can then use it to go to a little bike station, put your card against a reader, and select a bicycle. And I think you have more or less half an hour on the bicycle to ride from A to B, park it in another station, and then your journey's finished. But there are a series of fines that can be attributed to your credit card if you go over the half an hour limit. And the idea is just for people to be able to zip about in the city from place to place quite conveniently on a very cheap and environmentally friendly transport form.
On the pavement?
On the pavement, and it's horrible. Very dangerous, and while it has some benefits, I can see there being a lot more problems in the future with people herring around the streets.
Public safety issues, in other words.
Yeah.
In other words. Okay. Congestion. London, Barcelona, which is the worst?
Even now I'd say London. It used to be terrible, but about 5 or 6 years ago they introduced something that they called the congestion charge, which the congestion zone is basically the centre of London, and the cost now is £8, so maybe about 10 euros a day, to take a private car into this zone. And the idea was it would reduce congestion in the city centre and allow public transport to move more freely and transport people around.
And it did see quite a lot of success. I mean, buses, I remember at the time I was travelling by bus to work, and it knocked 15 minutes off my 45-minute journey overnight. My bus went from 45 minutes to work to 30 minutes, so it was a good thing.
Yeah.
I think.
But in Barcelona there isn't really the same kind of congestion. The peak times at rush hour, in the mornings and in the evenings, then you get much more traffic on the road, but you don't have the gridlock, the congestion that London used to get, because the design of the city streets, they're all more or less one direction for traffic, so it helps ease congestion around major blockage points.
Now, this is the trouble with London. It's such a well, Barcelona is as well, but a lot of central London is built for horses and carriages and horses from hundreds of years ago, so the streets just aren't designed for the volume of traffic that you get in them nowadays. So whereas Sydney, for example, modern city, the traffic was much more free flowing, and there was hardly any congestion there, I seem to remember, when I lived there.
Big wide streets built on a grid system, so it was quite logical for traffic flow. But in London there's lots of small, bendy, windy streets that intersect with each other and cause congestion points, bottlenecks. Okay, Tom, well, you've told us now about what the traffic was like in Sydney, but you also lived in Thailand, in Bangkok, for a long time. I imagine that must have been quite crazy.
Yeah, Bangkok was horrific for traffic. It was total gridlock most of the day, and there was such a huge variety of different forms of transport, like these things called tuk-tuks, which are three-wheel drive, sort of motorbike, mini car crosses, and bicycles, motorbike, everywhere. Just people riding on the pavements on motorbikes, no idea of any kind of traffic order or traffic lights, and yeah, just chaos. So, some of our favourite travel stories and our favourite modes of transport. What are some of your most memorable modes of transport you've taken?
Well, one of the funniest was when we all went to Morocco. All, a group of about 7 or 8 friends, went to Morocco in 1992, but unfortunately Tom managed to miss his flight. So I travelled with a group of his school friends about 300 kilometres down the Atlantic coast in a taxi, and trying to negotiate the price of the taxi, we settled on $50 and a friend's watch. So quite a novel payment method, travelling so far in a taxi.
Yeah, and I've had some interesting experiences on elephants, camels. I rode a camel in Egypt that was vomiting for the entire journey, all over me as well, which wasn't much fun.
No, it doesn't sound it.
Horses, sleeper trains in Thailand were one of my favourite. You'd get on a train, and I love sleeping on trains for some reason. Probably my favourite mode of transport. What about the chicken buses in South America?
They were crazy. You'd get on an old decommissioned yellow American school bus like you see in the films, but it was for adults travelling around bumpy, unpaved roads in rural Guatemala, and the local people would get on the bus with a variety of animals, including caged chickens, the occasional pig, a goat, and the noise and the atmosphere on the bus was very, very lively, but something very different from what we were used to coming from the UK.
One of my favourite stories is when we hired a Rastafarian with a plane to... Where was he flying us from? From Guatemala?
From Punta Gorda in the south of Belize up to, I think, Belize City, because most of the interior roads had been washed away by floods. So we were either stranded in this small town in the south, or we could charter a small aeroplane between the 4 of us and go to the north of the country where the situation was a bit better.
Yeah, and I'm sure he was stoned. His eyes were very red, and we got in this rusty plane that was very frightening. It was like taking off in a small Mini, and I really thought we weren't going to make that one, but we did. Anyway, apart from that, several forms of transport in Thailand. Songtaos, a sort of bench taxi, a taxi with benches in the back. They're very cheap. Cycle rickshaws in Thailand, where you have a little Thai man cycling you around, and they are quite little normally. I'm not being derogatory. And bicycles in Cambodia I've got. So what's the future of transport?
Oh, who knows? Everything's changed so quickly really in the last few decades. I mean, going back to the commercialization of the jet engine, that's opened up a whole new world of tourism. Like package tourism only used to be for very rich people at the beginning, but now it's very affordable for everyone. And global travel, so I guess maybe underwater, maybe marine hotels, or...
Oh, they're building them in Dubai at the moment, actually.
That wouldn't surprise me, being Dubai.
And you have to get a submarine to your hotel.
So something out of James Bond.
Yeah, exactly. Ridiculous.
Maybe space travel as well, commercial space travel.
Yeah, they've got the first Virgin Galactic, Richard Branson's company. They think they're going to launch the first commercial space flight next year, 2011. And you can book a place on it now with a $20,000 deposit. And it costs, the full ticket price is $200,000. And for that you get 3.5 hours flight, of which only 6 minutes is actually sort of in space. It's a suborbital space flight. So you get 6 minutes of weightlessness for $200,000. Are you going to go?
I wouldn't mind, but I probably need to get a new job before I can even think about affording it.
Yes. When I was young, I tried to go to space in a washing machine. That's a whole other story. Anyway, apart from space travel, generally fossil fuel powered vehicles are going to obviously die out. Bicycles and solar powered and electric powered cars are probably the way forward, I think.
I would hope so.
Anyway, thanks for listening to us, and bye bye.
Bye bye.
Hola, me llamo Rose y en la clase de hoy te vamos a enseñar nuevas palabras geniales para describir a la gente que se conoce durante los viajes. En inglés, a estas palabras se les suele llamar character o personality adjectives. Como siempre, también te vamos a enseñar un par de palabras coloquiales estupendas para que suene supernatural en inglés. Ahora vas a escuchar el vocabulario en inglés, seguido de su significado en español. Luego, podrás practicar la pronunciación repitiendo las palabras durante las pausas. Después, escucha con atención las frases de ejemplo con el adjetivo en contexto.
Friendly,
Simpático,
friendly, friendly. Unfriendly,
antipático,
unfriendly, unfriendly. The man in my local shop is really unfriendly.
Most Mexicans are very friendly.
Generous,
Generoso,
generous, generous. Stingy,
tacaño,
stingy, stingy.
My grandfather was a very generous person.
The Scottish have a reputation for being stingy. It's not true, of course.
Hay otra expresión coloquial genial que los ingleses utilizan para decir tacaño, que es tight-fisted. Tight quiere decir estrecho y a fist es un puño, así que literalmente significa de puño estrecho. También puedes usar solo tight para decir tacaño. Repite después de Tom.
Tight-fisted. Tight-fisted. John's really tight-fisted. He never buys Christmas presents for anyone. Grumpy.
Gruñón,
Grumpy. Grumpy. Cheerful.
alegre,
Cheerful. Cheerful. Sometimes I'm really grumpy in the mornings, Rose.
no, I thought you were always cheerful.
Sociable.
Sociable,
Sociable. Sociable. Introverted.
introvertido,
Introverted. Introverted. My sister's really sociable. She always makes new friends easily.
My brother's quite introverted. He only has a few friends.
Outgoing.
Extrovertido,
Outgoing. Outgoing. Shy.
tímido,
Shy. Shy. When I was young, I was quite a shy person, but now I'm older, I'm much more outgoing. Kind.
amable,
Kind. Kind. Selfish.
egoísta,
Selfish. Selfish. Self-obsessed.
obsesionado con uno mismo,
Self-obsessed. Self-obsessed.
A kind man offered me his seat on the metro today.
How nice. On my train, a selfish teenager was listening to incredibly loud music. Some teenagers nowadays can be quite self-obsessed. Boring.
Aburrido o pesado,
boring, boring. Interesting,
Interesante.
interesting, interesting. I met some really interesting people when I was travelling in Peru last year.
Oh, I find travel is quite boring, actually. Recuerda que si quieres decir en inglés que estás aburrido de algo, no puedes decir I am boring of something. Por ejemplo, para decir estoy aburrido de mis deberes, en inglés dirías I am bored of my homework. Repite después de Tom.
I'm bored of studying. We're bored of this film. She's bored of eating rice.
Por último, vamos a acabar la lección con 3 expresiones coloquiales geniales para describir a la gente. Aquí las tienes.
Moody,
Malhumorado,
moody, moody. Touchy,
susceptible,
touchy, touchy. Chilled out,
relajado y muy en la onda.
chilled out, chilled out. I used to be really chilled out until I stopped smoking.
Yes, I've noticed you're a bit touchy nowadays.
I just feel really moody all the time. Perhaps I need a holiday.
Gracias por escuchar nuestra clase sobre personalidad y estado de ánimo. Si tienes alguna pregunta, no dudes en mandárnosla en la casilla de comentarios que hay para este podcast en nuestra web.
Gracias por acompañarnos con este podcast de inglés.fm. Recuerda que el workbook contiene una transcripción completa de la conversación, listas de vocabulario, notas culturales y la clase. Lo puedes descargar de forma instantánea desde inglés.fm. Nos vemos.